Hello everyone. So this is the fourth chapter from my contemporary romance novel, Under a Namibian Sky. She should have known. Naomi cursed under her breath as she walked around the side of the building to the pool, only to hear the sounds of someone already swimming there. Luca. She'd forgotten all about him. Well, actually, she'd been thinking about him all night, wondering what to do with him today, where to take him to see more elephants. She'd ignored the little voice in her head that insisted it wasn't the only reason she'd been thinking of him, of his gorgeous body, his lovely smile, his dark eyes. She'd been concentrating on where to take him so much, in fact, that she'd forgotten about the possibility he might be swimming early this morning. It was the best time for it, when some stars still twinkled in the lighter blue sky, the ghost of the moon faded, and the birds sang their welcome to the new day. Damn, it was too late to turn back. Luca had just finished swimming a length and was leaning on the side of the pool closest to where she was standing. His muscled shoulders and arms were as gorgeous as she thought they'd be. He was wearing a wicked grin on his handsome face. He'd seen her. Buongiorno, what a vision you are, amore. His eyes travelled down her body, admiring her usual pink bathing suit, and rested momentarily on her pubis before travelling up again to her breasts. The mischievous glint was undisguised as his eyes sought and held hers. His gaze was so bold and so shocking that she felt heat travelling up her neck, despite her best intentions. What? Was he flirting first thing in the morning? Did the man never stop? Naomi forced a smile to connect with her face. He was a guest, after all. Good morning, Luca. You're up early? Habit, I'm afraid. Come on in. The water is lovely. Ah, but you probably already know that. I'm guessing you swim every morning, or did you come to join me this morning especially? At the risk of sounding petulant, I'm not even going to answer that. Luca pulled such a face of supposed disappointment that Naomi couldn't help giggling. She shook her flip-flops from her feet, dropped her towel over them, and dived over his head into the pool. She swam underwater for a while before surfacing and swimming freestyle in the opposite direction. But he surprised her by touching the side of the pool next to her at the same time her hand landed there. You're fast. Luca's grin was one of sheer joy. I know. I love swimming. And flying? He was still grinning, his eyes staying on hers. And flying. And driving fast cars? His grin became wider as he wiggled his eyebrows at her. And driving fast cars. So, what's with the photography? You seem such a man of action otherwise. It's just one of my hobbies. The other is painting. I told you. I love beautiful things. She was determined not to fall for his flirting yet again. Yesterday it was new, but now it was old news. Like beautiful cars, you mean? I don't create them myself, unfortunately. There are far more talented men to blame for those, but now and then I get to have some input on the colour or interior design or something small like that. Not enough to satisfy my creative urges. He moved closer to her, his eyes still fixed on hers, a smile emphasizing the contours his designer stubble created on his handsome face. He spoke just above a whisper, taking his cue from Naomi in order not to wake the other guests. But unbeknownst to him, the only other guest at that moment was Santina. But how about you, amore? What are your hobbies? What stirs your passions? What was it with him? Did he even know another way of conversing other than without flirting? When she didn't answer, he moved even closer until their arms touched. It sent an electric shock through her body. As though paralyzed by his physical presence, she couldn't move away from him. Perhaps he'd experienced it too. She didn't miss the slight widening of his eyes at their touch. No, she must be mistaken. Before she could say or do anything, Luca spoke. "No, don't tell me. Let me guess. But let me ask you this first. Will you join me for breakfast?" Another first. No other guest had ever invited her for a meal with them. She couldn't deny that she was beginning to enjoy her time with Luca more than she'd imagined she would. But she was still alert to the personality change she was sure would happen at some point further down the line. It always seemed to follow that pattern with these wealthy types of guests. She had to think quickly. Luca was waiting for an answer. But fraternizing with the guests wasn't allowed. But Auntie Elsa had asked her to look after Luca and Santina, and Auntie Elsa herself had joined the after-dinner excursion last night. It was something Naomi had never seen her do in all the years she'd known her. Naomi was just about to answer when Otayan suddenly appeared at the opposite side of the pool. He seemed to be distressed and used her childhood nickname. His voice was soft with restraint. "Nonna, you must come quickly." Naomi knew well the old man wouldn't approach her directly when she was busy with a guest, unless something serious had happened. She turned to Luca. "Please excuse me, and would you take a rain check on the breakfast invitation? If you'd like, perhaps we could have a sunrise safari breakfast tomorrow." Luca couldn't hide his disappointment. Again, his reaction amazed Naomi because she hadn't realized it mattered so much to him. To her mind, he was just being polite, flirty again, and looking for company whilst having his breakfast. Meanwhile, 2 other young Herero men had appeared soundlessly next to Otayan. Both sported the dark green uniforms of the anti-poacher patrol unit. Both carried rifles. "I'm really sorry, Luca. I have to go." But before she could get out of the pool, Luca's hand caught her arm. His touch was firm yet sensual. "I'd love to come along, please." Naomi knew, with members of the anti-poacher unit here so early in the morning, it could mean only one thing. Poachers had killed an elephant, and it could get dangerous if the poachers carried guns, which more often than not they did. "I'm sorry, Luca. It may be too dangerous. I can't let anything happen to you." "I'm a big boy. I won't get in the way, and I know how to take care of myself." Naomi could see he was determined, and there was no time to argue, not if they wanted to catch the poachers. Besides, she'd pay good money to see who could resist those eyes when they implored with such intensity. "Okay, but please do exactly as I say. I won't be held responsible if anything happens to you." "Deal." Luca got out of the pool quickly. He grabbed her arms and pulled her out behind him. A wide smile of happiness lit up his eyes, and he jogged to his room to get dressed. He waved to her as he opened the door to his suite. "I'll see you at the truck." Naomi nodded, went to retrieve her towel and flip-flops, and arranged to meet Otayan and the 2 guards at her truck parked near the kitchen. Then she ran to her room to get changed. Moments later, she came running through the kitchen, walkie-talkie in one hand and keys in the other. She nearly collided with Luca as he came running around the corner, carrying his camera equipment. Both had thrown clothes together, and their hair was still wet. His dark blue t-shirt and jeans looked expensive, and she had on her usual vest and shorts uniform. They spoke in stereo and laughed at their synchronicity. "Oops, sorry," but their laughter died quickly as everyone got down to business. Everyone knew time was of the essence. Otayan and the 2 patrol guards got up from where they'd been sitting at the wrought iron table just outside the kitchen door. Everyone jumped onto the truck, and Naomi floored it towards the gate that took them into the Namib desert. One guard leaned forward and gave her directions to the dead elephant's position. It was a bumpy ride, but Naomi drove as fast as the tracks would allow her to go, trying to avoid the deepest potholes. She didn't want to have to deal with a flat tire. Luca was silent, but Naomi could feel the excitement practically pouring off him. Now and then he lifted his camera to his eyes, but the bumps and holes in the road probably didn't offer the ideal scenario for taking great pictures. She'd take him somewhere later, where he could get good pictures, and hopefully that would make up for his missed opportunity. She was trying to remember that he shouldn't be her priority at the moment. After about 5 miles, they arrived at a sandy riverbank with trees on both sides. Otayan pointed a little further to their right. "Just there, Nonna." How he could see so far and so clearly at his age was something that had always amazed Naomi. No wonder he'd been their best tracker for years. He was popular with the tourists, who returned to Desert Lodge year after year for walking excursions into the desert with him. As she drove closer, Naomi could see the towering grey hulk of the dead elephant. The 2 guards, on extreme alert, held their rifles at the ready, looking out for the poachers, or for any big predators already near the kill. But apart from a few birds of prey that took flight as Naomi stopped the truck near the elephant, no vultures had yet announced the carcass to any other predators. Naomi saw Luca going for the door handle. She laid an hand on his arm to stay him. His arm felt toned and hot beneath her fingers, and she became acutely aware of his nearness. In case he was about to protest, she lifted a finger to her lips, asking him with her eyes to remain still and silent. A strange sound had everyone on high alert, but nothing stirred except for the trees in the slight early morning breeze. Otherwise, an unnatural quiet surrounded them. No birds sang, no cicadas announced the heat of the day. It was as though the desert was holding its breath. Only the weird sound came from somewhere nearby. Luca cast a questioning look at Naomi. She shrugged her shoulders in response, as if to say, "I don't know what it is either." But Otayan and the guards obviously knew what it was. They remained calm, but seemed very anxious. Naomi had stopped the truck behind the elephant, but she already knew what they'd see as they moved to its head and the big holes where the tusks used to be. It incensed her that it was all the poachers ever took, that they would kill these gorgeous animals just for their tusks. But apart from trying to make things difficult for the poachers, it seemed to be a never-ending war with them. Naomi sighed. When Otayan gave the signal by nodding, Naomi released Luca's arm and slowly opened her door, trying to make as little noise as possible. Luca followed her example. Camera strap slung over one shoulder, he too proceeded with as little noise as possible, following behind Otayan and the 2 guards. The source of the strange sound they'd heard became quickly plain as they reached the elephant's head. Between the dead animal's front feet, which had remained stretched out in front of her as she fell, stood a tiny baby elephant. It still had baby elephant fluff all over its body. Its miniature trunk was touching its dead mother's face repeatedly. Sounds of deep distress came from the little creature as tears were streaming from its eyes and clinging to its eyelashes. Naomi's hand went to her mouth, and tears sprang from her eyes. She stopped in her tracks as sobs tore from her body. No matter how many times she'd seen this scenario, it always killed her inside. But this was the smallest baby elephant she'd ever seen. It must have been only days old. She felt Luca's arms slide around her as he pulled her into his body. Holding her head against his chest ever so gently with one hand, he stroked her back with the other as he tried to soothe her. She was grateful for his kindness, and after a moment she held his torso as she cried on his chest. His body felt hot and hard, protective and comforting, his toned muscles discernible beneath his light t-shirt. She accepted the handkerchief he'd pulled from his jeans pocket, dabbed the tears from her eyes and blew her nose. Instinctively, he seemed to know when she'd need it. As she stepped away from him, suddenly embarrassed at the display of emotion, she noticed that the front of his t-shirt was wet with her tears. She wiped at it with her fingers. "Oh, I'm sorry, I'll make it up to you." She felt so silly and clumsy. What must Luca think of her? But for once, he didn't respond as he had been doing since his arrival. He was serious and seemed as upset as Naomi felt, his face tense and white, his eyes dark and unreadable. A small tick along his jawline further showed his deep distress. His voice sounded deeper, more authoritative. "It's nothing. The heat will dry it soon." It was Naomi's first glimpse of Mr. Armati. She liked his realness and wished he was always this way with her. Yes, he could be funny and make her laugh, and his incessant flirting was rather endearing, but she preferred the real man. Otoyan had asked them to stay where they were. He and the 2 guards tried to find the tracks left by the poachers so they could follow them. The young guards who'd found the dead elephant earlier had followed the strict protocol not to go after the poachers on their own. Soon more guards arrived, appearing from among the trees as though they were phantoms. Naomi counted quickly. There were 20. All carried guns, and all stood silently after having nodded a greeting to her and Luca. When Otoyan found the correct spoor among all the many footprints in the sand around the elephant, he signalled them. 2 of the younger guards stayed with Naomi and Luca, while the others followed Otoyan as fast on a trot as they disappeared quickly through the trees. Luca had remained still until then, but as soon as Otoyan and the guards had left, he went about photographing the dead elephant from every angle. Meanwhile, the 2 guards tried to win the baby elephant's trust so they could get it onto the back of the truck. Luca came to stand next to Naomi as they watched the guards battling with the tiny baby. "What are they doing?" She couldn't tear her eyes away from the Ellie as she responded. "They're trying to get it into the truck. We can't leave it here. It would die horribly, starving to death. At least at the lodge we can feed it, get a vet out to look it over, and send it to an elephant orphanage nearby." When the guards finally managed to coax the Ellie away from its mother and got it onto the truck, Naomi and Luca quickly clambered on board. The subdued atmosphere on the drive back to the lodge indicated the sadness everyone felt by what they'd seen. That the little elephant was still deeply distressed and crying for its mother concerned everyone. Luca had elected to sit at the back with the baby elephant and the 2 guards. He seemed unable to stop himself from fussing over the little Ellie and couldn't resist taking loads and loads of pictures. His decision to sit there gave Naomi the space to experience her sadness without having to consider him. She breathed out a grateful sigh as she turned the truck onto a different track, one that didn't have as many potholes as the one they'd come on. She wanted the Ellie to be as comfortable as possible. How scary it had to be for such a tiny animal. As she looked back to check that her charges were comfortable, vultures were already circling the elephant carcass they'd left behind. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you for liking and sharing my videos, and thank you so much for subscribing. I'm really honoured and grateful. Until next time.